And now I'd like to introduce today's presenters. H. Karthik, partner, leads Everest Group's global sourcing practice, which includes all global location optimization practice and our work with shared services or global in-house centers, as well as country associations. Next, Rohit Agarwal is a practice director in the global sourcing practice. In addition to working on research and advisory engagements, he also leads Everest Group's research membership focused on specifically on global in-house centers. Our third presenter, Shaili Rachaudhuri, is a senior analyst with Everest Group and has worked across projects related to shared services growth strategy, locations optimization, market assessment, and career intelligence and benchmarking. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Karthik. Take it away, Karthik.
Hey, thanks, Tracy. Thanks for the kind introduction. And I realize our names are, much tougher than yours. So thanks for taking the effort on this. As Tracy mentioned, the objective of this webinar is to talk about how enterprises are leveraging shared services centers or global in-house centers, as we call them, to deliver data and analytics. Just a quick point on terminology. You're going to be seeing a terminology called GIC throughout this presentation. So GIC, as we've been doing this for, 6 years now, stands for Global In-House Centers, which effectively means an in-house center of a large global enterprise. It could be set up in an offshore location or a nearshore location, right? It's also called in the market in many ways. Could be called a global capability center. That's the most recent version of this that's used in some places in the market. It's also called captive shared services, multiple terminologies. What we're going to talk about today, if you were to just move on to this, with this presentation. First of all, let's start with the definition of data and analytics, right? We're covering both data and analytics. That's the first point I want to make. And within that, covering multiple segments. So starting with data management, modeling and decision support, which includes a lot of the predictive, prescriptive analytics, includes the use of AI and machine learning. It also includes visualization and dashboarding, data analytics strategy, and data trust. So we're looking at the entire spectrum of what you would call as data and analytics. And to talk about what is maturity of GICs in the segment mean, or how are enterprises delivering value, we're going to be using our proprietary Pinnacle model and an assessment based on the Pinnacle model, which we will come to later on in the webinar. But to start off, just a quick poll question for all of you as we warm up into this webinar. And the simple poll question we have for you is: does your organization leverage GICs for data and analytics? It's a simple yes or no question. Just to keep in mind, the definition of data analytics is the entire spectrum of what I just spoke about: data management, modeling, visualization, dashboarding, data trust. So we'll give it a few seconds for you to populate this poll question. It's a simple yes or no. So hopefully it shouldn't be too difficult for you all to answer this. Okay, so I guess we will stop the poll. Yeah, it's interesting. More than 2/3 of this group leverages GICs for data and analytics, which is interesting. However, from a market perspective, we believe that there is significant untapped potential. On that note, just moving on to the to the next slide. Clearly, the number of GICs leveraging data analytics is increasing. So almost a 10 to 12% growth roughly 330 companies leveraging GICs for data and analytics. And the reasons for leveraging GICs are not too surprising. And my experience is that clearly companies are leveraging the GICs as true capability hubs for data analytics. So as you think about it, given the challenges in various, what you would say, source markets like the US or UK, the offshore nearshore locations are being preferred to build data and analytics. It's really not about the cost saving, but really the value and capability that this brings in. However, this 328 only represents 22% of the enterprises that have set up GICs. So here's an important point for all of you to take away from this. Only 22% of the enterprises that have set up GICs are using them for data and analytics. They're doing other things in the GIC, could be IT services, could be finance, could be operations, but there is significant untapped potential. Obviously, the group that has joined the call today, I guess, represents more of this 22%, and hence the almost 3/4 of this group is leveraging GIC. But we do see that this is going to increase going forward. On that note, moving on to the next part of the webinar, I briefly touched upon the Pinnacle model, right? And for those of you who may have attended some of our previous webinars, you may have heard of this Pinnacle model. So Pinnacle is our proprietary model that really takes a view on two things. One is outcomes. So in the context of this study, it means to what extent has data and analytics delivered out of GICs created an impact for the broader enterprise. Right? When you say cost impact, it is the savings it has generated for the broader enterprise. Operational impact means the improvements it has made to the parent enterprise in terms of operational metrics, such as your process cycle time, accuracy, staff productivity, etc. And business impact really means to what extent has work done in the GIC truly impacted the business of the enterprise and transforming this into a source of competitive advantage for the enterprise. So this could mean improving the enterprise's product market positioning, helping minimize customer churn. How do you delight customers better? So analytics to enable things that drive business impact. So that's the y-axis. The x-axis looks at capabilities in analytics, and we'll talk about it later on in this discussion, where my colleagues Rohit and Shirley will walk you through more detail on what's the vision and strategy for D&A, what's the breadth and depth of services, how are GICs developing people, what's the operating model, and how are they using technology. So that's the capability maturity. So this study was done based on 50 GICs, and if for those on this webinar who would like to participate in this, we'd be happy to share this methodology and the survey with you. You could participate, and then we would share with you a customized assessment of where you stand with respect to the rest of the market. So these 50 dots that you see on this chart are actually the plottings of the 50 GICs that participated in this. So just a quick word on this, on the sample of this 50. It covered multiple industries that leverage GICs. It's got a good representation across banking, financial services and insurance, manufacturing, retail, even professional services firms like the big fours that have their own GICs. It covers sort of multiple industries. What you see highlighted on the top right, you call Pinnacle GICs. These are 5 out of the 50 that we would call as Pinnacle. Right? Pinnacle meaning they have demonstrated significant outcomes across both cost, operational, and more importantly, business impact, and are also fairly mature from a capability standpoint. So through the rest of this webinar, we're going to talk about what a Pinnacle GIC is doing that's different from the rest of the market, right? And that could serve as useful pointers for both the enterprises and the GICs attending this webinar as you think about leveraging your GICs more strategically as far as data and analytics is concerned. Okay. So with that, if you could move to the next slide, please. Okay. Yeah, we'll start with the y-axis in terms of talking about the outcomes. Before that, a quick poll question. What is the primary objective that your organization is trying to achieve through data and analytics, right? So we talked about different outcomes possible. A quick poll question for all of you as you think about, how is your organization leveraging data and analytics? I'm sure all these objectives are relevant, so we request you to select the most appropriate option. Just to see, kind of talk about what we're seeing in the market, right? Clearly, more enterprises leveraging data analytics for, I'd say, the things that impact business outcomes, things like improving the end customer experience, driving top line growth. Having said that, an equally, if not more important application of data analytics is also on things that impact core delivery, things like process accuracy, SLA compliance. So it would be interesting to see what the audience thinks on this. So we will close the poll question shortly. Okay, interesting. Over half believe that the primary objective is to improve the end customer experience. And that isn't surprising given the direction we're seeing for data and analytics overall. However, let's take a view on what is the broader market doing in terms of data analytics. On that note, let's talk about the three different types of impact which data and analytics is delivering, and talk about what we see in the market, and that was evidenced by the study. So first of all, to talk about the three different types of impact, Pinnacle GCCs or GICs have been able to achieve significant impact across all the three types of impact. So it's not just business impact, but even in cost impact, operational, and business. So on cost, Pinnacle GICs have generated 3 times the savings from data and analytics compared to other GICs. Just to be clear, in our assessment, this doesn't include savings from arbitrage. So this is really things like analytics driving productivity improvements, or analytics driving better inventory planning in the case of a retail company that then helps reduce costs. On operational impact, interestingly, there isn't much of a difference between what Pinnacle GICs and other GICs have done, except in staff productivity, where Pinnacle GICs have achieved much higher impact. And as we move along, we'll talk through examples of what companies have done, the Pinnacle GICs have done to enable greater staff productivity. On business impact, especially in the areas of enabling revenue growth and improving customer experience, which is what the whole question just said, Pinnacle GICs have achieved 1.4 times higher strategic impact. Let's move on and talk a little bit about each of these types of impact. So the first, hello, I think there is some background. Okay, so first, speaking about the cost impact, as I said, Pinnacle GICs have been able to achieve 3x the amount of cost savings than other GICs. Now, what is really driving it is savings that the Pinnacle GICs have been able to achieve on multiple areas beyond arbitrage. So just to talk about a few examples, where this is coming. An example could be in a retail store, right? A retail company where the GIC helped, through better demand forecasting, minimize the amount of inventory and how long it's held at a particular site. That's an area where it helped reduce cost impact. The other areas could be assessment of different methods that help reduce employee attrition. Right? So that analytics help reduce employee attrition and thereby impacting costs. So there are different examples. I just touched upon a few. The other is on sort of better demand supply planning. So for example, if we know that certain stores are ordering a certain amount of goods at a certain quantity, using analytics to minimize. If you were to take a banking and financial services example, this could mean assessment of different types of frauds, right? Evaluating the sources of frauds that then result in a significant reduction in costs. The next area of impact we're going to talk about is on operational impact. Here, interestingly, as we move on to the next slide, as you would see on this chart, right? If you were to look at improvement in SLA compliance, if you were to look at improvement in process accuracy, improvement in reporting processes, there isn't much difference. Yes, there is still some difference where the Pinnacle GICs are doing better, but at an aggregate level, there isn't much difference in the performance of these two categories. However, in the area of staff productivity, Pinnacle GICs have achieved much higher impact compared to the other GICs. So Shelly, I know you've seen a lot of examples of this in the market. Can you talk through what you believe is a very interesting example of a GIC, of a Pinnacle GIC that has used analytics to improve staff productivity?
Sure, Karthik. I'll give an example of a global bank which actually leverages its GIC for predictive analytics on the talent side. Specifically, it uses predictive analytics to, let's say, measure the impact of employee engagement programs or maybe international mobility programs, performance and succession planning, and even L&D initiatives that they have taken on staff productivity. Using these insights, the GIC was able to identify things that worked well, things that they needed to improve, and subsequently, it realized a significant improvement in staff productivity.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Shelly. I think the broad message we want to leave the audience with is, yes, analytics to improve customer experience, top line growth is important, but equally, if not more important, is the application of analytics internally, right? That's the example which Shelly just spoke about regarding staff productivity. Now, moving on to the strategic impact. Just to recap, that's the third impact on the y-axis that we saw. So clearly, Pinnacle GICs are impacting their parent organization more impactfully, really around improvement of CSAT score, as you see, increase in top line growth and revenue, reduction in fraud, risk-related incidents. So you may think, why is this strategic? For a financial services company, this is fairly strategic. Improvement in employee satisfaction. So in our methodology, in fact, there is a detailed assessment in the survey that has many metrics behind each of these, but we're just sharing with you the summary. So clearly, Pinnacle GICs have been using analytics to drive revenue impact and strategic impact. Just to walk you through an example, a leading European bank was tasked with the responsibility to figure out why is a particular product market share declining, right, in a market. Through leveraging analytics, looking at different factors, they were able to identify the root causes, which then resulted in an increase of more than 15% for the product's market share. Another company used analytics to drive better sales force effectiveness, which then impacted the increase in top line. So we've seen many examples here where the Pinnacle GICs are using analytics to impact the strategic areas for the parent organization. Right. With that, sort of moving on. So till now we've spoken about how our Pinnacle GIC is different in the impact they're delivering for the organization. I'm now going to ask my colleague Rohit to talk about, okay, so what differentiates them from a capability standpoint, and how is their journey to building these capabilities been different from the rest of the market when we look at GICs?
Thanks, Karthik. As Karthik mentioned, while it is good to look at how some of the GICs who we are calling Pinnacle GICs have made much more impact for the global enterprises. What's really interesting is as we start peeling it further and uncover the elements, the actions that have enabled them to do better. So we analyzed a bunch of capabilities and to see what really makes a difference. But before we get into those details, we also identified three areas where Pinnacle GICs have taken this journey differently. There are three clear dimensions how they have approached this very differently. The first one is around the intent with which the Pinnacle GICs have approached building data analytics capabilities. They have primarily focused on building data analytics capabilities in areas which will help them improve the delivery team's effectiveness. What does that mean? Is that, for example, if a shared services is a pure play finance and accounting center, they have large finance and accounting capabilities, back office capabilities, then primarily focusing on application of data and analytics in the finance and accounting space to improve the liquidity ratios, improve the working capital utilization, improve the collections, etc., has resulted in better impact as compared to other GICs who may have a mix of reasons. And that's also clear. When we looked at other GICs, there was no clear pattern on what really is the intent to build these capabilities. Some of them do it to get arbitrage benefits. Some of them simply want access to a different kind of talent. While some of these are part of the objectives that Pinnacle GICs also have, the prime intent is to improve the delivery team's effectiveness. The second area we looked at was how did they approach building these capability? How did they make it happen? And here again, almost 60 to 70% of the Pinnacle GICs followed a proactive approach. They did not really wait for anybody to tell them that they need to build these capabilities. They explored the areas where they had an opportunity. They kind of experimented, they built POCs, and they demonstrated those to their business stakeholders, global stakeholders, to get a buy-in. Whereas in terms of the other GICs, while we have seen a mix, but primarily they have pursued data and analytics after the parent organization has given them a mandate. So they are more acting as delivery arms versus strategically leading these initiatives for the organization. The third area has been what are the outcomes that these GICs have targeted? As Karthik mentioned earlier, and also when we looked at the poll number 2, the response that we got, the customer experience and top line growth are some of the very important parameters. And GICs which have targeted these as the top outcomes have inherently done better. They have been able to achieve better impact. Also, in the process, they have resulted in a lot of operational improvements, in a lot of cost savings as well. While other GICs have somehow made cost savings the prime goal and then expanded or diversified their focus to achieve other outcomes. So these are the three clear areas which we want all of you to keep in mind in terms of the approach, the mindset with which companies are approaching this and how Pinnacle GICs have done better. Let's move on and start looking at what are all the different capabilities that were assessed as part of the study. So in our Pinnacle model, when we looked at the 2x2 matrix early, on the x-axis, we had different capabilities, and the cumulative impact across each of these capabilities was what determines the position of each of the GIC. If we break it down, we have assessed GICs across 5 key categories. What's their vision, strategy? What's the breadth and depth of services they have built? How are their people model? What is the operating model they have? And very importantly, how are they approaching or how they're building data and technology capabilities? You will see there are about approximately 15 different factors underneath these 5 categories that were assessed. While all of them are important and it's a cumulative impact or cumulative capability that allows Pinnacle GICs to do better, when we looked at the responses, we tried to establish a cause and effect relationship between some of these capabilities, which really allowed Pinnacle GICs to accelerate their performance, either achieve better impact or do it faster as compared to others, or maybe even both. And we identified 6 individual dimensions or 6 key individual capabilities that made a difference. This was around the role that the GIC plays. This was around the depth of delivery. What is the penetration in a particular area? And there were other areas, for example, talent retention, the funding approach, and technology capabilities. As we go on, we'll talk about each of these. But let's start with the first one. What's been their overall vision for data and analytics? As we look at this, there's a very clear gap. Pinnacle GICs, all of them, and this is noteworthy, consider themselves to be strategic partners for their parent enterprise. What that means is that they are not back office teams, they are not delivery teams. They are decision makers. They go hand in hand with their business stakeholders in figuring out what they need to do, how they need to do, what should be the outcomes they target. And then they're kind of partnering with the enterprise to make it happen. Whereas other GICs are mostly acting as delivery arms, mostly executing what they've been asked to do. We already talked about how Pinnacle GICs have been more proactive. Let me take a couple of very interesting examples here. For a global consumer products company, which has a large F&A GIC, the GIC proactively started identifying that even if they have almost 70% of global F&A services based in these centers, they started looking at it and identifying where and how can we identify analytic solutions to prevent cost leakage, reduce risk, etc., etc. One of the key challenges they faced was what are the right they have lots of data, but what are the right questions they should be asking? What are the things that they should be trying to look at, and accordingly come up with some insights to help their counterparts across different parts of the businesses globally to identify areas of preventing leakages, improving usage of funds, etc., etc. Another example is for a professional services company wherein their China-based center actually plays the role of a global hub for data and analytics. So they have both the technology capabilities required to make this happen, and they have both the functional and domain capabilities. And overall, they are core to building the strategy for data analytics for the entire organization. They identify what are different areas where this needs to be applied, how this needs to be applied, and so on and so forth. In fact, they're even undertaking the task of building a centralized data platform which will enable higher usage of data analytics across the organization. Let's look at the second dimension, which is more about how what is really critical is the depth of services. So we looked at the service capability maturity. What you see on this page is an assessment of what's the average penetration achieved by GICs in these areas. For example, in finance and accounting, among the 50 GICs, and the blue bars represent other GICs, the green bar represent Pinnacle GICs. So on an average, other GICs have about 14% of their finance and accounting data analytics based out of the GICs. However, if you look at it in terms of the Pinnacle GICs, they have done much better, about 22%. This gets more interesting. The trend continues between all the blue bars and green bars, where Pinnacle GICs have done much better. But in some of the areas, for example, customer service, sales and marketing, or very industry specific work, Pinnacle GICs have achieved really high penetration, which means a lot of work in data analytics space in these areas is happening from the GICs. In fact, some of the best in class GICs have achieved more than 50% arbitrage, more than 50% penetration. One of the bank has about 70% of the data analytics for retail banking operations based in the GIC. Another example is where all the marketing analytics for a US based bank is actually happening from their GIC in India. So it's a specialized team acting as the global hub for all that work. What's more interesting is that it's not just about the amount of work, but also the role that these GICs play. If we move on to the next page, what we also looked at is how in some of these areas, the GICs have played a capability ownership or a global leadership role. What that means is, for example, if we talk about data management, is the person who is responsible for figuring out the data strategy, data management strategy, the person who's heading that area, is he also based out of the GIC, or is that person based out of the global business locations? So what we saw is that Pinnacle GICs have done much better in bringing in and developing positions which have global leaders or capability owners based in the GICs, and that's been true across different areas of work: data management, data trust, and of course, along it's more prominent in among other GICs also in areas of modeling, decision support, visualization, dashboarding. A couple of examples to share here is that one of the professional services firm, the global head for data analytics, the person who is the chief data analytics officer for the organization globally, is actually based in their GIC. Similarly, in a retail company, the India-based GIC is actually the global or the regional hub for all the data analytics work that happens for their Asia Pacific businesses. We have seen such positions prevalent in GICs across regions. But of course, we've seen more examples in geographies which are more developed, for example, India and Poland as compared to others. Let me request my colleague Shelley to talk about some of the other capabilities.
Okay, if we move on to the next page, here we're talking about the talent angle, and Rohitashu already spoke about it briefly. With respect to talent management levers for data and analytics, two things are prevalent. One, both Pinnacle and other GICs have adopted a multi-pronged approach for hiring and retaining talent. The second thing is that these modes remain similar across Pinnacle and other GICs, which means that Pinnacle GICs are not necessarily adopting a radically different approach. However, they are executing better than other GICs when it comes to these modes. For example, if you take collaboration with educational institutions, Pinnacle GICs are definitely taking a more systematic approach towards, let's say, contributing to the course curriculum for data and analytics degrees, maybe even setting up such degrees at universities, introducing more internship programs so that people become familiar with the kind of work that they do in data and analytics specifically. With respect to talent retention, Pinnacle GICs have a stronger focus on improving employee experience. Some of these levers include offering more challenging work opportunities, encouraging a system of innovation and idea generation. For example, for one of the GICs, in one of the GICs, they have these code jams that they undertake every week so that people can participate in them and generate ideas. They have better roadmaps for career progression. They also have knowledge sharing sessions, let's say every month. This allows for more extensive collaboration with functional teams. So a bunch of different levers, nothing very aggressive or nothing very different, like I mentioned earlier, but they are definitely, Pinnacle GICs are definitely approaching it in a more programmatic manner. The next capability that we will look at on the next slide is with respect to the operating model. And there are a bunch of factors over here which are quite interesting. One of the important things to consider when we come to operating model is the budget that is being spent on data and analytics and the source for this budget. For instance, investing in talent management, like I mentioned earlier, skills development, or even technology enhancement, all of this requires a budget, requires money. Pinnacle GICs are spending almost 2 times that of other GICs with respect to this budget. In terms of funding, the funding approach that they adopt for data and analytics, there are 3 mechanisms. One, there's a centralized fund, which cuts across all the functions. The second is more of a self-funding initiative where the GIC generates some savings by being productive in other areas and then employs this money for data and analytics. The third one is more of an ad hoc approach in which the various businesses or the business units offer funds for data and analytics initiatives to be delivered from the GIC should the need arise. Now, Pinnacle GICs prefer going through more of a centralized fund at the parent enterprise level. One of the reasons behind this is that data and analytics is an enterprise-wide phenomenon. It affects everyone and it cuts across functions. Given that it's crucial, having a centralized fund actually prevents an ad hoc mindset and gives it way more direction. Lastly, one of the interesting aspects of the operating model is the approach towards idea generation. If you could just go back to the previous page. Yeah, thank you. What we mean here by idea generation is, how do enterprises or GICs figure out the areas in which data and analytics will help generate useful insights for the enterprise. So while most GICs have periodic discussions with the parent stakeholders for this purpose, Pinnacle GICs are also using crowdsourcing platforms for this. As an example, in one GIC, this platform showcases the use cases of data and analytics so that their employees can, thrash out new ideas. It's also a forum wherein successful ideas or use cases developed by the employees are showcased so that they may serve as a source of inspiration for other employees.
Yep.
Okay.
So just building on this, Shelley, I know there's a question that came in. It's probably the right time to address it. So there's a question as we talk about operating models. So one of the interesting questions that came up just now is, do GICs leverage pretty much their in-house capabilities, right, including tools, or do they partner with a specialist third party? And it's a great question. Longer term, in my experience on this is that the GICs want to build it themselves. In other words, because the analytics is considered core to the competitive advantage. And for those who have successfully implemented the model over a longer term, want to move to a sourcing model where it is done completely in-house. Having said that, this is not applicable for tools. So tools essentially something that they or the parent enterprise license. But there are creative ways in which enterprises have partnered with service providers to build GICs, or in other words, GICs and service providers collaborating for analytics. The scenario we see this more often than not playing out is in the initial buildup of capabilities, especially when there is pressure to build capabilities quickly. Enterprises work with a service provider to incubate the capabilities in the GIC. So this is not really may not be a formal build, operate, transfer kind of contract, but a model where a specialist service provider could deploy their experts, their resources to help lay the processes in place, help build the initial capabilities and analytics, and eventually train the GIC workforce to kind of ramp up and scale it themselves. So this is an area that we are seeing interesting partnership models evolve between GICs and third-party service providers. Now, the second model that we see is after the GIC is matured in analytics, there could be certain pieces of work, especially on the visualization, dashboarding, right? Or for that matter, some of the research type work, which are more, I guess, process-centric, that even the GICs could outsource to a third-party service provider. So the GICs have the overall responsibility for delivery, but some part of that work may get outsourced. So those are sort of interesting models that we see from an operating model construct when it comes to sort of either doing it completely themselves or partnering with specialist third-party service providers. Okay. Hey, Shelley, sort of back to you.
Sure. Thanks, Karthik. Let's just get into the technology aspect now, which is the last capability that we considered for the assessment. With respect to technology challenges, both Pinnacle GICs and other GICs face similar challenges with respect to lack of data standardization, incompatibility of legacy IT systems, and so on. However, again, the key approaches that are being used by the Pinnacle GICs, they're quite interesting, and Pinnacle GICs leverage these solutions greater or more than other GICs, specifically 1.3 to 1.4 times that of other GICs. Some of the examples over here that we've seen is, for instance, Pinnacle GICs using natural language processing and ML, machine learning DevOps, for this kind of work, for converting unstructured data into structured data, for instance, One GIC is also using deep neural networks for structuring and extracting information. Another point which Rohit Ashwa touched upon briefly was on building a central repository or data access platform. This kind of a platform helps integrate the existing data in the organization. Usually data is present in silos in the organization, so this platform helps bring it all together. Few Pinnacle GICs are building such platforms in sync with the onshore data and analytics teams. Some of the other areas of interest, or rather areas where Pinnacle GICs are doing more, is in terms of moving to a cloud-based environment. Many Pinnacle GICs have highlighted this as an opportunity area for both storage and cloud computing kind of work. Even in terms of leveraging the external ecosystem, and Karthik already addressed a similar question on that point, Pinnacle GICs are collaborating with third-party service providers, let's say for leasing solutions, and also with startups through accelerator programs, 1.5 times as that of other GICs. So a bunch of different solutions, and more, a more focused approach to solve some of these technology challenges. Let's move on to the next slide, please. Okay, here we've addressed some of the prevalent concepts that are there with respect to data and analytics in the market.
Okay, so Shelly, let me start with this, right? Let's talk about team structure. It is widely believed that for enterprises to be successful with the GIC model for data and analytics, it is important to centralize the data and analytics teams, right? And the commonly cited benefits of having centralized data and analytics teams. So just to be clear, when I say centralized, I mean, obviously data and analytics means different things in different functions, right? So you could have data analytics in a retail bank, you could have data analytics in the investment bank, you could have data analytics in finance. And there is a view in the market that by centralizing, you're creating synergies in terms of efficiencies, you're creating better talent mobility opportunities, knowledge of best practices. But Shelly, do you think that's pretty essential to deliver Pinnacle performance?
Thanks, Karthik, for the question. Pinnacle GICs at least have used a hybrid model for data and analytics. Now, this hybrid model combines the best practices from both a centralized data and analytics team and in-function data and analytics teams. You already explained what a centralized team does, or what are the benefits of a centralized model. With respect to in-function data and analytics teams, sometimes it's essential to have them because, again, taking an example of a bank, in an investment bank, it may choose to have the data and analytics team for a specific function, let's say trading, within the trading function, because people require more domain knowledge and business know-how to run analytics for this function. What Pinnacle GICs have done is that they've adopted a hybrid model, which means that the in-function data and analytics teams generate, or rather they come up with the business problems. And because they have more domain expertise, they're able to articulate these problems better. The centralized data and analytics team, on the other hand, brings the necessary technical expertise to the table. It builds and runs the analytics solutions. And in some cases, this centralized team may also undertake some firm-wide initiatives. For example, let's say tracking changes in data regulations, or even helping with overall data governance. So it's a blending of the two models that seems to have worked for Pinnacle GICs. Another prevalent perception regarding data and analytics is that without high-end analytics, that is predictive and prescriptive analytics, it's very difficult to generate high business impact. Karthik, is this true? Is this perception true?
Yeah, this is interesting you raised that, Shelly, because a lot of the view in the market is that analytics needs to evolve. We need to do predictive, prescriptive, AI, machine learning. You can pick whatever buzzword you want. That's really is the future, right, of data analytics. Now, our assessment and experience is this is important, but not necessary. In other words, just because you're doing high-end analytics, it doesn't mean that you're delivering high business impact. Right? I think the focus on business outcomes matters more, regardless of whether the capabilities are high-end or basic. Let me take an example. In one of the banks that we work with, the analytics that they do is really to figure out, look, if there are 10 steps in a process, which one is really adding value? Do we really need all 10 steps? Now, does that require high-end machine learning? It doesn't. But then the focus really on what really matters for the customer. Right. Now, don't get me wrong here. I'm not saying it is not important to build high-end analytics. It is absolutely important because that's really provides deeper insight, but only when it is linked to solving for a particular business outcome and not doing analytics for analytics' sake can that really guarantee Pinnacle performance. So interestingly, even for the Pinnacle GICs, Sherry, you can add on here, about 60% of the work, analytics work that they're doing in the GIC is actually what you would call level 1, level 2 type analytics. So it'll include visualization, dashboard, data management type work. Only 40% of their work they do is high end, and yet they're Pinnacle because, as we spoke about earlier, they're able to deliver wide-ranging impact in terms of cost, operational, and business impact. Okay, so Sherry, let me sort of move on there and talk about the third theme on this slide. Clearly, one of the biggest challenges that GICs have faced is on business context. So what we mean by that is you do have talent that understands statistical modeling, but you may not have talent pool that understands how demand supply really works in an oil and gas environment, right? Or how trading actually works in a markets environment. If you take a capital markets firm, so is it fair to assume that Pinnacle GICs have overcome this challenge?
That's a great question, Karthik. And actually, this lack of business context continues to be a challenge for Pinnacle GICs. If I were to give some statistics over here from the Pinnacle study, 60% of Pinnacle GICs have highlighted this as a concern, which is not very different from the 70% number that other GICs have highlighted. There are some measures that are being taken by Pinnacle GICs to solve for this lack of business context. They're taking a more practical approach, say. For instance, for at least 2 out of these 5 Pinnacle GICs, the idea is to hire more experienced people in the data and analytics team. For example, one of them hires people with at least 7 to 8 years of experience. These people have the necessary business context and domain experience, and effectively they can bring more knowledge to the table. Some of the other modes of solving this issue is having regular sessions with functional leaders to understand business problems, bringing in external consultants for knowledge sharing on industry evolution. One of the more interesting examples is that of developing a VR or virtual reality based tool which employees use to better understand the business environment and areas of improvement from the perspective of a customer. So it's essentially a day in the life of the customer. And this tool helps them understand that better. In another case, in another Pinnacle GIC rather, the data and analytics team actively researches use cases and proofs of concept which are relevant or which are being developed by other GICs in different industries. And then they figure out how they can possibly use these solutions for their own work or for their own industry. So a variety of solutions, very practical solutions to solve for this problem.
Okay, no, that's interesting, and this is something which, a challenge which not just Pinnacle GICs, it's applicable for third-party service providers, is applicable for the enterprise as well, right? So how do you think about in a global delivery model? How do you think about solving the business context? Okay, so we've got a few minutes left. Let me just wrap up with one last slide and then discuss a few questions. Therefore, here are the 5 things that enterprises need to do to create differentiated data and analytics capabilities. Number one, think about how data analytics can improve delivery effectiveness. As we've spoken about earlier, Rohit touched upon what's been the journey of Pinnacle GICs. They've started off analytics in areas which are pretty core to delivery effectiveness. And obviously, cost savings is not the only objective to be achieved. There are broader benefits in terms of both operational and strategic impact. Second, GICs need to take a proactive approach to demonstrating data and analytics capabilities. Now, we've talked about different examples. Think about a business problem that the GIC could solve. So, for example, taking the whole staff productivity example, which Shelley spoke about, the GICs applied it with respect to their own employees, right? Now, the next step could be to taking that approach and saying, can it be applied to the broader global organization? So, taking a proactive approach. Third, we'd like to talk about, I spoke about this whole advanced data and analytics. Yes, it's important, but don't get caught up in the hype. Right? Really focus on the business outcomes, and even simple insights can make a difference. Next, building from what Sherry touched upon, there is no magic answer to talent practices. It's really about doing different things. When I say different, multi-pronged approach to acquisition and retention, but doing it consistently and intentionally. So execution matters more than trying to be, too creative. Of course, that doesn't hurt if you're creative, but just the creativeness of the idea won't help. It's really about the consistency and the programmatic execution that will make a difference as far as talent is concerned. And last but not the least, addressing data and analytics technology access issues will be a challenge. Need to take a flexible needs-based approach, and there is no silver bullet to this. Okay, and with that, let's address some questions that came about. So Shelly, one question for you, right? Rohit talked about how the penetration of the Pinnacle GICs. When I say penetration, we mean the total ratio of the global workforce, how much is in GICs, is 2 to 3x what it is for the other GICs. Does scale make a difference to achieving Pinnacle performance?
Thanks, Karthik, for the question. Scale actually does not have a strong bearing on GICs in terms of achieving Pinnacle performance. As you yourself said, it's actually the depth of delivery or penetration which is more indicative of success. Furthermore, if you recall, I talked about instances where you mentioned it once with respect to Pinnacle GICs not building scale in let's say predictive and prescriptive analytics capabilities, but they have still achieved Pinnacle performance. So in some of these cases, the scale that Pinnacle GICs have achieved is actually lower than that of some other GICs, non-Pinnacle GICs, but this has not actually hampered their success. So to answer your question, scale does not have much of an impact as a very important parameter.
Yeah. Okay. No. So I think the other sort of question that just came about is how is the challenge of building trust, right, between the analytics and functions being handled. So I'm interpreting this question as being, how do you build trust between the analytics teams in a global delivery model? It could be in offshore locations, nearshore locations, and the respective functions. It's a great question. Again, no silver bullet, but I've seen GIs companies do 3 things. And this requires a combined effort across both the parent organization and the GIC. First, treat the GIC teams as a true extension or an integrated model of the global function. So this is not a back office or a third-party service provider kind of mindset where you're delivering particular service. Right? You're really saying we've got combined responsibility to solve this business problem. And as we talked about earlier, in the mature GICs, the ownership of the problem really residing with the GIC. That's sort of point number one. The second, really, there is no magic answer to building trust other than proving it. So we talked about examples where GICs have demonstrated proof of concept somewhere and proactively that has then built greater trust. The third way to do it is more creating greater visibility for the analytics workforce in the GIC, which could mean simple things like showcasing the analytic solutions delivered by the GICs in the global operating committees of the function. So there are different models, but clearly building trust is important, especially in the initial phases, or when it comes to building new capabilities as far as data analytics is concerned. Okay, so we have time for a few more questions. Rohit, here's a question for you. Are there examples of GICs that are doing only data analytics work, but do not have any of what you would say a traditional core delivery responsibilities, like in operations and IT?
Yeah, that's interesting question, Karthik. So there are examples, yes, but these are very few. For example, one of the US-based bank which has a global operations, they set up a dedicated GIC center purely to focus on a lot of their retail banking analytics and marketing analytics work. Now, just want to clarify that while this GIC unit is purely focusing on data analytics, the bank also has other shared services with which this data analytics center also collaborates, which have multiple different capabilities in operations and technology, etc. But in case of pure play data analytics centers, there are very few. But we have seen that companies typically do this in addition to their operations GICs and then build around that.
Okay. So I think this has been a good set of questions, and that we are running out of time. There are a few more that we will address separately. And just to recap, the materials for today are accessible to all those who registered. Just want to just close out before we do that a couple of points. The insights that you saw today are coming from our GIC shared services membership, which is the program that is aimed at helping GIC leaders evolve with the evolution of GICs and providing ongoing support. This is targeted at GIC leadership and parent stakeholders who are responsible for GICs. So if you're interested in this, happy to mention that, take that offline. Secondly, for all those who participated in this webinar, we said obviously cost is still an important issue. It may not be the only issue that GICs are worried about, but clearly being able to drive further cost efficiencies is important. So we are offering you a complimentary cost benchmark on up to 3 standard roles in 3 different countries. So you could say, I want a cost benchmark for Java development, or you want a cost benchmark for let's say a typical analytics function or a typical operations function in 3 different countries. You can, in this deck, it has the contacts of Rohit or Sherry that you can contact, and happy to do this on a complimentary basis and kind of really help you benchmark your costs with the market. We're sort of just a minute over time. Thank you once again for your participation in this webinar, and look forward to continued interaction. Over to you, Tracy.
Thank you. And thank you to Karthik, Rohit, and Shaylee. And thanks for everyone for attending today's webinar. Again, you will receive a follow-up email within 1 to 2 business days with a link to download the presentation slides, along with an on-demand playback of today's live session. And on behalf of the Everest Group and our presenters, thanks for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.